So welcome to 1134 Story Podcast. I am Steve Cohen. This morning I have Mike Ryherd. Ryherd?
Ryherd, like a field of rye and a herd of cattle.
There you go. In the studio this morning. And you are never too lost to be found. We are going to jump right into our 1134 story that Mike's got prepared today. If this is your first time this morning, know that 1134 story is literally where hell is flipped on its head. That's what 1134 actually spells out upside down. It's the time I saw on the clock twice a day, almost every day before I came to Christ. So here we go, Mike. Tell me about this. Hell on earth is what we're talking about, where it's flipped and the kingdom of heaven is brought in, and God gets the glory.
Sure. Well, I was born into a family that was, it would be probably the most dysfunctional type of family you could have ever heard of, Steve. And that my brother Kevin and I, we knew growing up. We're biological brothers, and I was 7 months and he was 19 months when we were sold by our biological parents. Now there were abuse issues, and the state of Illinois was aware of the abuse, but our biological father schemed to get something, a quid pro quo, out of us as babies. And so we have a receipt for our adoption. It's $600, and that was in July of 1973. And so I didn't know a lot of the details, other than there were things like, our parents would share some of it. Like they found us at a place where we had severe diaper rash. We had human bite marks, which is unthinkable. We had other things, some cigarette burns and different things, and so as I've interviewed, folks who were there when we were brought in that day. One is a psychologist, and she happens to be a cousin. And she said, Michael, we were worried that you boys would have attachment issues, that you wouldn't be able to attach because of the severity of the abuse when you were infants.
Yeah.
And God graciously brought us into a home where everything that was lost was restored. So that's the hell story. And Steve, I can share with you how at age 37 I get a phone call from somebody I've never met before. And the phone call went something like this: "Is this Mike Ryherd?" And I'm sitting in my house in Corinth, Texas, watching the news or whatever I'm doing. And I said, "It is." And she says, "I'm your sister." I said, "You have the wrong number." And she says, "No, I just talked to your brother Kevin." And I thought before that, well, maybe Kevin's pranking me. We'd do things like that. But then
That's a messed up prank.
Right. There's no way that she would use his name and he'd be okay with that. If it was truly a prank. And so she said, "You were born to Jimmy and Vicky Hunter." And I said, "Yeah, I've heard those names before from our parents." And she says, "We've been looking for you." And that we really piqued a curiosity in me, Steve, that I wanted to, I couldn't get to the answer fast enough. So I said, "Who's we?" And she said, "You're the second of 12 kids. Wow. And we had no idea. All sold by our biological parents. And after this point, we began to connect. And 6 weeks later, my brother Kevin and I are flying out to Huntington, West Virginia, meeting another 6 of the siblings who could attend. And we just had a great time meeting them, and found that a lot of the abuse that was we had always heard about was spread across 12 others. So the story was real. So.
Wow, that's intense. So the wonderful thing about doing live stuff is leaving our phones going.
I heard the ding.
So we'll see if we
it's going to ding in 2 minutes.
It's going to ding in 2 minutes. Do you want to actually just grab that real quick?
Yeah,
so this
I want to do that.
This is the beautiful aspect of it, but we're definitely going to actually come back and start kind of dissecting that. I'm sitting there thinking, you're saying, okay, well, I've got this dysfunctional family. I'm sitting there looking back at my family. We're actually got some pretty similar, but it's not really my brothers and sisters, and no, they weren't sold.
Yeah.
But there's some pretty similar dysfunction. And just last year, I get a phone call or a Facebook message from this woman I've never heard of or met. "Hey, are you Steve Cohen, son of Rich Cohen, nephew of Bill Cohen?" And I'm
That's interesting.
And I'm like, "How do you know, and why are you asking?"
That's right.
Like, all of a sudden, my defenses go up.
Sure.
And she's like, "I'm Bill's daughter. And we are one of, we don't know how many children, and we would love to actually gain information. We'd like to get background information and see what we can learn, and we'd love to meet up. And we haven't been able to do that yet. But it's interesting. All of a sudden, I'm 47 years old at the time, and all of a sudden I find out I have who knows how many cousins that I've never met.
Sure.
Now, cousins are different than brothers and sisters, but it's still this weird kind of dysfunction in how my uncle traversed across the nation, and we have no idea. So it's this weird. I'm not trying to compare in any way, shape, or form. It's just this weird connection or similarities there, and I wonder, like, how many people are in our prayers that you're hearing this, that people that have gone through this, that are going to be able to hear the hope and healing that come along in Mike's testimony in this, his story, where kingdom on earth. Like, how does that restoration come from such a garbage, pardon the language, of crappy upbringing that just being sold for $600 as an infant is just amazing.
You asked where the redemption comes in. It really came the day we were sold, and two great parents.
Yeah.
Never heard them cuss. Watched them follow Jesus.
Wow. That's awesome.
The redemption came in that we didn't have to deal with things that a lot of our friends who had their biological parents had to, I think they dealt with divorce. They dealt with some of the pains that just, you don't want to, any of your buddies to go through or whatever. And so we came into this family that was so tight knit. We loved our parents, who are our adoptive parents, more, and I know this to be true, than a lot of my friends who had their biological parents intact. And the redemption was that I did not, Steve, have to deal with things as a 4-year-old that no 20-year-old should have to deal with. I dealt with 4-year-old things. At 8, I dealt with 8-year-old things. Now, what became very interesting is that when I began to have to deal with this, because I could bury it in the sea of my own forgetfulness and say, God, you restored me. You took me out. In fact, in the trip to Huntington that I mentioned 6 weeks after learning this, I said, I'm great with meeting any siblings, great with meeting anybody who's wanting to meet me, but I don't want to meet, Jimmy had already died, but I said I don't want to meet Vicky. And lo and behold, I get into a room in the basement of a Presbyterian church in Huntington, West Virginia, and there's Vicky. And I felt terrible, because I'm like, I'm not going to make eye contact, and it's my own biological mother. I was just like,
wow.
I'm going to dip. I'm going to look this way, that way. I'm not going to make a connection, and I didn't.
No, was that actually planned that she was there, or is this just a happening?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but a drop ball. She wasn't supposed to be. It had been, understood before I arrived that Mike is not comfortable with this, and all the other siblings were. In fact, all other 11 met Vicky. I chose not to, and I just said, God did something so good for me, in bringing me. And I don't judge any of the other. Not everybody went to as good a home out of the 12 of us. But I that was my decision. It was just no, I'm good. God blessed me, and I'm not crossing back over into Egypt when God gave me something that felt a lot more like the Promised Land. So
wow.
And so I would say when I began to write, I went through a divorce in 19, and it was at this point where I began to write, and in the book Kids Sold Separately, I write that there were some villains, and certainly 2 biological parents who decided to sell off 12 kids. But I was one of the villains ultimately, and began to create my own mess. They created a mess for 12 of us, but I began to create some of my own. And, just the what I had buried for all those years, now I was having to deal with on paper and for the whole world to see. And, so in all of that, Jesus is really the hero,
Yeah.
And if there's a point to it, Steve, and it's just that whatever that first chapter is, and I wrote some really ugly, hard chapters. It's not determinative of the last chapter.
Yeah.
When he steps in, he knows what to do with broken pieces. It's a masterpiece when he's done, and it doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean there won't be a lot of pain. But I've been, teaching across the last few weeks. I lead a discipleship ministry that our hardest yes, our most difficult yes, is the most beautiful yes that we give God. Not when it's all, not when Job had all 10 kids and everything's fine and they're feasting because there's plenty. It's when he was giving the yes that came at the greatest cost. So
Yeah.
that's always our most beautiful yes.
Yeah, man. I'm still kind of reeling. This is the second time I've actually heard this story, and I'm still just how that actually happens. But I understand, like, family is messy.
Sure.
That's one of the initiatives with Now Found is family. We believe that there's always room for one more. That's one of the things on where we go. We just actually spoke at the Chosen Conference out at Prestonwood Baptist a few weeks ago, just talking about the difficulties of actually bringing one of the teachings that my daughter and I got to do was actually teaching on her book, what's called Equally Treasured, and it's talking about bringing additional kiddos into the house, like the beauty and the hardship of doing that. And then we have 3 other books about foster care and adoption. So we understand this stuff is ugly and hard. One of the weird things that we've heard so often is people aren't willing to step into foster care or step into the possibility of adoption because they can't take the heartache. And man, I look back at that and I go, and this is not a judgment. I get it. It's incredibly hard. We've done it multiple times. But I look back at these parents that God brought to you and their willingness to actually just sit there and go. Now, it was a little bit weird, just the fact that they actually bought you.
Sure.
Right? So there's a little bit maybe to actually unpack there. Like, I don't know the legality of that whole situation there.
Sure.
But I'm wondering if their heart was really to actually rescue, not to go buy a kid.
Sure. No, that's
Right.
exactly what it was. In fact, we heard it all growing up, and I would stake my life on it. What had transpired is the state of Illinois became aware of our situation, and there was a gentleman in the foster care system in Chicago, Illinois, who said to my parents, my adoptive parents, Ellis and Helen Ryherd, hey, there's some boys that are in some dire need, and so they began to come out weekends and visit with us, and then they would take us for weekends. And yeah, I mean, we bonded, and where we were not bonding with our biological parents, and so there was in fact no desire on their part to do anything illegal. They were upstanding people, but the biological father, he came up with his own plan, and he wanted, as I said, a quid pro quo. And he said, well, if you really want these boys, we can do all of this through the state of Illinois, or here's $600 and it can just be between us. And that happened to be what happened with the next 10 after us. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So now you said, so you never met your biological father.
True.
Is that correct?
That's true.
And you said you still haven't met your biological mother, or
Yeah,
how's that?
she died in December of 22, and so we were filming out with NBC Universal, and my brother Kevin and I, the brother I grew up with, he and I led a memorial service on the beach in Oxnard, California, and so I did it for somebody I'd never met, and
Wow.
it was all about redemption and how, if I had any 2 words to say to Vicky, it would be thank you. It's not screw you. It's nothing ugly. Like, what kind of mom are you? It was just it'd be thank you. God's grace was in it.
Yeah,
So,
that's one of the things that we. So when we adopted our youngest, God gave Courtney a book called Where Your Beginning Began. We didn't know it was a book. It was a poem. He just literally 10 o'clock at night, we're all going to bed, and he just drops this poem on Court's heart, and we thought at the beginning that this was just a poem for our youngest.
Yeah.
It's about 10 days prior to her birth. So we're like, yeah, let's just, awesome. That's a great thing. As a family, we have a couple artists. We're kind of creative. We like
Right.
doing things together. So we ended up drawing a book and putting this book together just specifically with the heart to get it to Michaela. And we went off and we spent a lot of money having this book professionally illustrated. And then we just bought this one copy of this for Michaela. Like, our heart was just so that she would understand that her mother made one of the hardest but most beautiful decisions. Number one, to give birth, to keep the baby full term, to provide a home within her womb for that child as she grew up. Like that's a sacrifice and a
bet.
hard decision and a beautiful decision. And then she made another decision, was to actually find a different home for that baby to grow up in, that child to grow up in. And that is such a hard but beautiful decision. And the sacrifice she makes, like my heart for our youngest is to later on in life to have that same heart that you're having, is thank you, not why did you. Now there can be hurt. We can definitely be hurt in these times. Don't get me wrong. I can't imagine what it feels like to actually have my parents not, or to feel like my parents don't desire me. But I think so often we see that the parents' desire for the best for us is greater than their desire to keep us. And there's beauty in that. There's this redemptive aspect of that. If we're only concentrating on the negative, which you had every right to do, only concentrating on the heartache, the hurt, the pain, the struggles that you went through because of this, that could be a totally different conversation you're actually having on the beach. And you said Oxnard? Yeah. So that's a totally different memorial service.
Sure.
Where did God change your heart? How did, like, is there an aspect of that? Is there a wrestling that you actually had while you're going through this? Was there a place that flipped, or was it always more of a place of appreciation, like where your parents pouring that or setting that mindset growing up?
No, the interesting thing to your point would be that I grew up having buried it. I grew up never having dealt with it. I didn't have to. Yeah. I was dealing with all of the best, if you will, not riches and, everything I ever wanted. I didn't grow up like that, but grew up with the stability that every kid needs, the structure that every kid needs, the godly fear and discipline that, were provided to my brother Kevin and me. I thought my name was in the Bible. My mom used to say, Michael, study to show yourself approved, a workman who needs not be ashamed, but who rightly divides the word of truth. I didn't even know what that meant, other than I kept hearing Michael at the front of that. And I'm like, I must be in there. I didn't have to deal with it, Steve. And so when things fell apart in 2019, it never fell apart learning that this had happened, because our parents had been open and upfront with us that this had transpired. These were the circumstances. My dad, I don't know how, but he was in the Aragon Arms Hotel in downtown Chicago, and he said, we went looking for you two because you were not where we were. You were not where we expected you to be, and so we went into a different room in a different apartment, part of the apartment building, a different room. And, we were fishing for food out of a dog bowl. And he says, that was you boys.
Wow. Fishing for food out of a dog bowl.
Yes, sir.
That's a hardship that I don't think many people can even imagine.
Yeah.
What that looks like. And here we are. You've written a book, Kids Sold Separately. It talks about your story.
Yes, sir.
You're talking about filming with NBC Universal. What's the story with that? Like, the book, I know we can actually get at MikeRyherd.com, MikeRyherd.com. But what's the deal with NBC Universal? Is there a show? Was there a coming show? What's the deal with that?
Well, it's been off and on. There were some health circumstances with my brother back in December, and so we've kind of delayed things. But NBC Universal picked up the rights a little over a year and a half ago. And they wanted to tell a story about 12 kids who were sold by their biological parents. And I'm like, heck yeah, I'm interested in hearing, what y'all discover, because, it relates to a lot of what I'm learning right now. And of course, we met the other siblings, and they would share some of the same that they had found from their parents who raised them. Some of the same circumstances held true across the 12 of our lives.
Wow. So no release date yet, no completion of filming date.
No, we'll resume filming. Looks like it's good for summer of 2024, and so we'll get. I think we're going to be heading out east as opposed to west, and getting as many of us together as we can to get it done.
Wow. So that sounds like an awesome documentary.
Docuseries.
Docuseries. That'll be awesome. So, if you are. I'm trying to think of how to phrase delicately, right? If you are a child who's maybe still dealing with some of the trauma or the tragedy or the heartache from what you went through, what would you, if you could, let's actually do this, is if you hadn't buried, if you hadn't been in the house and there's a kid that's currently in your situation that you were in, what are maybe some words of encouragement? What are some things that you might be able to actually tell them? Or what would you want to even say to the younger Mike Ryherd?
Well, I'm going to probably just separate those two. And, I would say to anybody, regardless of what somebody, how they see your value, that's not how God values you. For somebody, it might be, 300 for me, 300 for my brother. And so it was worth in the scales of Jimmy's heart, roughly 3, 6 together. But when you look at how God values you and you see that he paid in blood, that he wasn't satisfied with streets of gold and angelic course, and that he was not satisfied at a table that you and I were not at, that means everything. Incidentally, Steve, long before I knew the details of this story, Isaiah 49 verses 14 through 16, my favorite verses in all the Bible. And I knew enough about the jacked up nature of because our adoptive parents told us. But it basically says this: Zion says to God, "You've forsaken me," and God says, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast, or the child to whom she's given birth? Even though she may forget you, see, I will not forget you. I've engraved you on the palms of my hands." And so, whatever we are worth or not worth, whatever the value is to somebody else, it doesn't determine God's value. He wants us. He paid in blood. I tell the guys that I disciple, you're worth more than $1 million to God, and $1 million diamond, and you don't misplace $1 million diamond. God's watching over you right where you're at. He's for you. He's far more on board with my salvation than I am. He paid in blood for it. I'm just like, this is a good thing, and he's like, no, I poured it out so that you could get here.
Yeah, that is awesome. That's kind of the heart of Never Too Lost to Be Found, right? Is this, we're talking about the value of people, the fact that God hasn't lost you. I was 21 years an atheist. I thought I was as far away from God as I could possibly be. And what I didn't realize is the whole time he was right next to me.
Sure.
The only difference, there's like this veil or this realm, this thin veil between me and him.
Right.
But he was there the whole time. And he would actually, he encouraged me to read the Bible. I thought I was reading the Bible to actually debate Christians and rip their faith apart and to pull their stuff out of context and tell them the content that they're actually reading based on the context of it doesn't actually make sense. It didn't jive, and I would rip their faith apart. My goal, my joy in life at that time was to actually walk away from a conversation where somebody was crying or they had actually renounced their faith.
Right.
That's where I was at. And what I didn't realize is God was just sitting there. Right. And I know that God was going to take care of them. I look back and go, well, God, how did you let me do those things to those people? And
sure.
He's like, I got them taken care of. What I didn't want is for you. Like I wanted to be alongside you. And I never lost sight of you. I saw everything you were doing and I wanted you. And that's part of this whole thing. I come to Christ and God tells me in the lobby of a church, nobody else is there. He says, Steve, I love that you're now found, which is where the name of our ministry came from. But I need you to never forget you were once lost.
Amen.
And what that looks like, how you treated people, how they treated you, the depravity, the ugliness, the horrible aspects, all of the things that we see with our knowledge of good and evil. That evil aspect, we look at it. But I love how we've been talking about this whole time, where you have the opportunity to actually look at the good. You have the knowledge of both.
Sure.
And what's crazy is even in the depravity, we can actually see good. Now,
that's right.
Seeing good is actually part of the curse, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge of good and evil.
That's right. It's
the same fruit, same tree. We weren't supposed to have it. Along with it, though, we get to actually see both sides of the coin. And I would encourage for you, if you're dealing with this heartache, if you're feeling left or abandoned, to really seek God and ask him for what he sees. how he sees it. Because while we can always look at the good or the bad, what we were supposed to have, like there was literally a tree of life. And if we sit there and continue to pursue that, I think our lives totally change. Right?
That's right. Amen. I mean, you get to him and he knows what to do. You handle it on your own, and it's, we're grabbing buckets to get the water out of the boat, and he's chilling, and he's just like, I've got this. And
Yeah.
and I think, I've heard it said something like this, and I'll butcher it, but you've got to know that he's capable to do everything, that he's omnipotent, and that he loves you. And so if you know both of those things, then you can rest.
Yeah.
And I don't always do it that well, Steve. Sometimes I'm grabbing buckets and I'm trying to figure it out myself. And God's like, Mike, I thought you learned back in 1973. I knew how to get you out of the worst of circumstances.
Yeah.
He says, I can still do that.
Yeah. Man.
So.
That's awesome. So we are going to wrap up. We're going to actually try to have Mike back a couple of times here in the future. He's got another book. We've got some other stories we'd like to actually kind of jive with and kind of chat through. So, but again, we want to encourage you, MikeRyherd.com. Pick up his books, man. They're fascinating. His story is incredible. If this has blessed you, if this has encouraged you, maybe even challenged you, please like and subscribe. You can't imagine how much your support, you coming alongside us, means to us. We also have free resources at nowfound.org. Not newfound, nowfound.org. Please stop by and get that. And also be a seed of hope and healing for your friends and family. Share this with them. Drop this in their inbox, whether it's email or through the different social media channels. Give them a message of hope and healing and restoration and these encouraging stories. So we want to, again, thank you for your time. Again, this is Mike Ryherd. I'm Steve Cohen, and you are never too lost to be found. God bless.